I once decided to create an NPC named Thimbledorf Piddenpop, a gnome alchemist. I decided for this particular NPC that I wanted to create something special, something that my players would love. So I decided to put my heart, my soul into creating this NPC. It would not be something ordinary, something mundane, something that my players had interacted with before. Instead, this NPC would be special. This NPC would be fleshed out in elaborate detail. I would create an entire backstory for this NPC with the intention of having it come alive at the game table. And to help fuel that, I wanted to create Thimbledorf's own character sheet. Not a base stat block, but a fully fleshed out character sheet. My theory was that if I spent time crafting this NPC, turning it into something insanely detailed, elaborate, and special, that the NPC would be a massive hit at the game table. Because all that work and love, blood, sweat, and tears that I put into the NPC would surely reflect during gameplay. So that's exactly what I did. I put everything I had into creating this NPC. It was something like 8 hours or so. It was an entire day's work for me. And that's a lot of time to spend on an NPC when you have the rest of the adventure to create as well. But I was convinced that I would have an NPC my players would adore. So I did it. Over 5 pages of backstory, a special character sheet just for the NPC. And then the game session came up, and it was an awesome game session. We had tons of fun in the adventure. The players were slaying monsters, they were rescuing prisoners, and then I introduced Thimbledorf Piddenpop. I was practically giddy with excitement because I had spent so much time working on this NPC, and I was anticipating my players' glowing reception of Thimbledorf. And of course, you know exactly what happened. It was a yawn fest. My players did not care one bit about my dear gnome alchemist. They were completely indifferent. And my heart was broken, my morale was shattered, and I went off and I cried in a corner. Okay, it wasn't that bad. I'm a grown adult, I generally don't behave like that, but you get my point. That NPC, despite all my effort into fleshing him out and making him awesome, fell completely flat at the game table. I learned that the amount of time and effort you put into creating an NPC does not directly correlate into how much your players are going to care about an NPC. Ultimately, what I learned is that the worst NPC I can create is the NPC that my players don't care about. The NPC that my players are indifferent to. If my players love an NPC, that's wonderful. Even if my players hate an NPC, well, shoot, that's good too, because they have feelings, and as a game master, I can do something with those feelings. And those feelings serve to motivate my players. But when there are no feelings, there is neither love nor hate, and I have nothing. My players don't care at all, and it's time to move on. Hi, I'm Luke Hart, and on this channel, I share my nearly 30 years of Game Master experience so that you can run amazing games that your players will love. And today we're talking about NPCs, and specifically, we're talking about how to create NPCs that your players will actually care about. Because those are the only NPCs that really matter in your games. And I'm gonna break this video into 4 main parts. First, we're going to talk about some high-level points. These are lessons that I've learned and now apply when I make NPCs. Next, we're going to talk about things that apply when creating all NPCs. Then we're going to move on to villains, which are arguably some of the most important NPCs that you can have in your games. And then finally, we're gonna wrap up with talking about allies. Now, before I jump in, I wanna let you know that hardcovers are finally back in stock over on the DM Lair store. The single most common email that my team and I get in our support box is people asking when hardcovers of Lairs and Legends 1 and Into the Fae are going to be back in stock. Well, we now have them. And now the fulfillment of the Secret Art of Game Mastery is also wrapped up. We also have hardcovers of these books on the DM Lair store. There are even some of the limited edition leather covers left over, but they are going to go fast, and there was only 1 print run ever of these bad boys. So if you want to get your hands on an anthology of adventures, monsters, traps, puzzles, and other GM resources that that you can drag and drop into your games, or a level 1 to 5 adventure module designed to be easy to run for new game masters and their players, or the compiled knowledge of over 100 years of game masters, or 2 books filled with templates to help you prepare and run your games. I'll throw a link down below where you can learn more and pick them up. General NPC guidelines. Okay, the first thing I want to talk about are some general guidelines that apply to creating pretty much any type of NPC, whether it's an ally or a villain, an NPC that is going to play a major role in your campaign, or an NPC that is going to play a very minor role. These guidelines apply to pretty much everything. First, do not make character sheets for NPCs. A character sheet was designed for a player who is playing a character. One character. They were not designed for a game master who is running an NPC. Because here's the thing, a player usually only has one character that they're running. So if a character sheet has quite a bit of complexity to it, that's not that big of a deal because that's all the player has to do. But a game master has a lot of stuff going on during the game, and running an NPC is just one tiny part of what they're doing. So if you create a 2 to 4 page character sheet to run your NPCs with, it's going to be way too much work and way more information than you actually need. You're going to be in a situation of information overload where perhaps there's just so much that you end up not being able to use any of it. Instead, as a game master, what you want to have for your NPCs are stat blocks. The only reason to have a character sheet or a stat block to begin with is to inform skill checks, and if things devolve to combat, to have game mechanics to use during said combat. And a stat block will serve those purposes just fine, and stat blocks were designed the way they were for game masters. They're succinct and simplified in ways that character sheets just are not. So when you have to choose your tools, choose the tools that were designed for you, the game master. And remember that character sheets were designed for players. Next, do not write out elaborate backstories. You do not need 5 pages of backstory for an NPC. If you have that much backstory for every single one of your NPCs, not only is it going to take you tons of time to create, which takes away from the time you spend creating other elements of your game, such as the adventure, but I guarantee you that you're gonna find that much of those backstories that you write never get used. And why is that, you might ask? Well, there's 2 reasons. First of all, most NPCs are on screen for very short periods of time. So there's only so much backstory information that you can even use to inform that NPC's role playing. And the next reason is simply a matter of usability. If you have 5 pages written out of backstory, unless you have an amazing memory, you're not gonna remember all of it. And then during the game session, you're probably not gonna sit there for 5 minutes trying to look up the information on that backstory to use in your game. No, because your players are going to sit there and wait, and it's gonna lead to a slow, boring game. Instead, what you're gonna do is chuck that 5-page backstory over your shoulder, and you're gonna make up crap based on what you do remember. That's what's actually gonna happen during a game. So what I propose to you instead is saving yourself some time, and instead of writing a 5-page backstory, write out 5 bullet points, 5 bullet points of information that you can actually use during your game session. These 5 bullet points are going to be very easy for you to skim over during the game and actually use. You see, this is a very important game master technique. You want to minimize your prep time in such a way that you are maximizing your efficiency. In other words, you want to prep the things that you're actually going to use and not prep the things that you probably will never use. That will make your game prep much more efficient, saving you time and result in just as good, if not better, of a game. Now, I have a template that I use for my games when I'm designing NPCs, and it's the same template that we use when we're creating adventures and NPCs for the products that we publish. We have found that this template helps guide us through creating the most important parts about NPCs, whether they're allies, villains, or just random people that the players run into during the game. This is the same template that can be found in The Secret Art of Preparation, which is the companion book to The Secret Art of Game Mastery. However, if you don't have that book, that's fine. I'm literally going to be walking through the template and giving you examples throughout the rest of this video. What to create for all NPCs. The first thing that every single NPC should have is a name. Now, of course, you already knew that because if you've been a game master for just one game session, then you know your players are going to ask for the name. In fact, if you've been a game master for a few game sessions, you've probably already been caught with your pants down when you didn't know the name of some random NPC that a player walked up to. This is why I keep a list of random names behind my game master screen. However, I caution you to fight against the urge of creating fantasy names. And this is what I mean. Many times when we're writing names for our games, we make them long and fanciful. We make them fantastic. And of course, we have a certain amount of mandatory fantasy apostrophes that we put into the names. You see, Amera Shilananen Fairlithion may seem like a cool fantasy name, but it's not something the PCs will remember, and you're probably not going to be able to pronounce it yourself to boot, at least not 2 times in a row the same way. Like, you're going to change the pronunciation each time because it's so complex. However, Amera Fair is much easier to remember. Furthermore, if your names are too complex, you're going to end up with NPCs that have pet names given to them by your players. And this isn't really a problem. In fact, I think it's kind of hilarious. Sometimes you get these pet names and they just leave you dying at the game table, right? For instance, the gnome alchemist that I mentioned in the beginning of this video, Thimbledorf Piddenpop, himself got a pet name. And can you guess what my wonderful players decided to call him? Pudding Pop. That's right, Pudding Pop. And I'll be honest, I thought it was pretty funny. I kind of liked it. So you know what? I think we're probably at an impasse here. If you like the pet name thing and you like how your ridiculously complex fantasy names always get truncated by your players into something more usable and fun, then maybe you should create crazy long fantasy names because that's half the fun of running an NPC. So you just do what you know is going to work at your game table. Next, you need to select a species, lineage, or ancestry for your NPC. Now, the game system that you're running is probably going to call this something different, but we all know what it means. Now, my suggestion for you is that most NPCs should have an ancestry that is native to or close by the location where they live. If your fantasy game is like most fantasy games, then there aren't really any means of affordable mass transportation. And that means that most people are going to spend most of their lives close to home. The exception to this, of course, is when you have a major metropolitan city, such as Sharn in the Eberron campaign setting. Of course, I suppose Eberron is not the best of examples anyway, because they do have mass transportation there because it's sort of a technologically advanced game setting. Or maybe, actually it is. Because when you travel to the Mara Holds in Eberron, it still has mostly dwarves and a scattering of orcs. You don't find tons of elves there, nor halflings. All of that said, an NPC of exotic ancestry is definitely memorable and interesting. However, the game master, that's you, needs to know why they're there, possibly how they got there, and why they chose to stay. I'm not saying don't have diverse and interesting NPCs in the different locations of your game world. What I'm saying is that it needs to make sense in the context of your particular game world, and it'll be up to you, the game master, to make it make sense. Third, if the game system that you're using has alignment, knowing the NPC's core alignment can help to define that NPC's value. It also gives you useful information as the game master that helps you roleplay that NPC. My only word of caution here is that you shouldn't allow alignment to hamstring your ability to flesh out the NPCs, nor should alignment be the only defining personality trait of the NPC. By the way, I'm extremely curious at this point how many times I'm going to say NPC in this video. In fact, I'm sure that there are some of you that are already keeping track. And if you are, please leave us a comment down below letting me know how many times I say NPC. My money is on it being at least 50 times, though I probably could do like a word count on the script here when I finish with it. But I won't do that because that's cheating, right? Anyway, if your game doesn't use alignment, then you may want to define the things that form the values of the NPC. For instance, in Pathfinder 2nd Edition, that might mean knowing their edicts and anathemas. Anathemas. Me speaky. However, even if your game system does have an alignment system or something similar, asking yourself the following questions can make a character more rich and more real. What does the character want? What do they want to accomplish? What is the character afraid of? What causes them concern or anxiety? What does the character like? What do they dislike? What are the limits of what the character will do for the player characters? How can these limits be changed or challenged? Next, you want to write a brief physical description of the NPC. Now, don't limit this description to just what they look like. Use some of the other senses. What does the character sound like? Do they talk quietly? Are they loud and boisterous? Do they have an accent? Is it a thick accent or a light, barely perceptible one? How do they smell? How do they smell? Probably stinky in a medieval world, but hey, maybe not. Are they a meticulous bather who still smells of lye soap? Do they use perfume? Do they smell like they haven't bathed in a month? Also, give the NPC a memorable quirk or affectation. Do they always wear a trademark piece of clothing like a hat or a colorful scarf? Do they make constant eye contact or glance around while talking? Do they use their hands a lot when they talk? That's apparently something I do. My NPC quirk is the woo, the hands all over the place. Maybe they occasionally touch the shoulders of people they talk to. Do they repeat a word or a phrase like calling people my friend or ending every other sentence with, you know? And by the way, all of the examples that we've been showing you on screen as we've been talking about these things are examples from our publications such as Lair magazine. However, and I want to emphasize this, when you write these for your own games, I would write these as bullet points and be succinct. You don't need fancy, well-written sentences like we do in our publications. In fact, if you take a look at The Secret Art of Preparation and go to the NPC template that is included in that book, you're going to see that we give you one 7x9 page on which to write the information about an NPC. That's enough room for a few bullet points, not an entire thesis. And that's the exact point. Be succinct and write only what you need to run the NPC at your game table. The final thing that all NPCs should have is a secret. And the reason that you want to have a secret is that it gives the NPC something really cool that will either one, potentially come out when role-playing them, or two, something that your players might find out about that NPC. And that can be very rewarding. Now, I acknowledge right now that giving every NPC an interesting secret can be fairly challenging. However, remembering a few key things can make this easier. First, this doesn't have to be a dark secret, because not everyone has a deep, dark secret. If your NPC has a crush on another NPC, that can be just as interesting. And if your players find that out, well, that's information they can use in the game. Secrets can also tie into future plot points or threads that the character can provide to the player characters. Secrets could also be something as simple as the NPC keeping a dagger hidden in their boot because they're worried about bandits. Not that a dagger in the boot is gonna do a darn thing to help you against bandits. Now, all of that said about how secrets can improve gameplay for an NPC, there is a strong likelihood that an NPC secret is never going to come out during gameplay, and that it may only ever serve to help the game master roleplay the NPC. Therefore, I will submit that most minor NPCs don't even need a secret. I would save this for key NPCs and those that reoccur throughout your campaign. By the way, if you're finding this information useful, please give me a thumbs up and share this video with a fellow game master. And if you're not already subscribed to my channel and you think I don't completely suck, why not subscribe while you're at it? Creating major villains. Now, major villains in your game are going to need all of the things that we just got done discussing, the things that any NPC needs. However, they also need 4 additional characteristics. The first thing that a major villain needs is a means. All this means is that they need to have the ability to actually accomplish the bad thing that they're trying to do. If they're completely powerless and are not able to do anything toward accomplishing their goal, they don't have a means, and despite their evil intentions, they're never going to get anywhere. A villain like that is practically worthless because they present no threat to the game world. So villains with means might have minions at their disposal. They might have an undead army. They might be a wealthy merchant who has money that can buy their way toward progressing their goals, but they need to have a means. Now, part of the means is also a method that the villain uses to carry out their nefarious plot. If your villain's goal is to gain political power or to gain wealth, how are they going to do that? Do they have great political influence that they can use because they come from a noble family? Or are they a merchant who is using sleazy business practices to increase their profits? Those would be the methods they use. Now, remember that most interesting villains also consider themselves to be heroes. The distinguishing factor is how they're accomplishing their goals, and that is what brings them into conflict with the player characters. For instance, an NPC that wants power, but doesn't do anything that breaks the law or hurts people is not a villain. They're just an ambitious person with a plan. Or a merchant who wants to build wealth but is following the laws and isn't hurting anybody, and is in fact providing lots of jobs to caravan drivers and guards to protect them, and is increasing the commerce in the towns they trade in. Well, that merchant isn't a villain. One might argue that they are doing society a great service. And sure, they're making money in exchange for that service, but that doesn't make them a villain. The next thing that your villain needs is a motive. They need to have a reason that drives them to do the thing that they're trying to do. Why does the villain want to gain political power? Well, it might be because all their life they have grown up seeing the nobility and politicians abusing people, so they want to effect a change. However, to do so, they are quite willing to break the law and utilize all manner of horrible methods. And why does our merchant want to gather wealth? Perhaps their wife is slowly dying from a horrible illness, and the only way to save her is to finance adventuring parties who are searching for an ancient artifact that might possibly stop the progression of this illness. And you see, this brings up another salient point. A villain might actually have a worthy cause they're striving to achieve. However, what defines them as a villain is the methods that they employ to achieve those goals. Because in that villain's mind, the end justifies the means, and that is what in fact makes them villainous. In fact, I will argue that the best villains have motivations that are sympathetic, or at the very least are understandable to the players. Remember that most villains consider themselves to be doing the right thing. Anakin Skywalker became Darth Vader because he wanted the power to prevent the deaths of the people he cared about. He also wanted to maintain order in a chaotic galaxy caught in a pointless war. Magneto from the X-Men wants to end the suffering and persecution of his people because of his experiences with the Holocaust as a child. Skynet was designed to end war and ensure its own ability to maintain peace. Unfortunately, all of these benevolent intentions came with terrible methods: mass murder, attempts at conquest, and genocide. And this then brings us to another important point about villains. They usually have what we call a fatal flaw. This is the thing that prevents them from becoming the hero they believe themselves to be. This fatal flaw often drives their goals. For instance, Darth Vader was arrogant and believed himself more capable of achieving his goals than those around him. Magneto allowed his disdain of intolerance to become prejudice against non-mutants. Skynet lacked compassion for humanity. Now, if we break down the example of Darth Vader a little bit more, we will see that he wanted to bring order to a chaotic galaxy. He feared the loss of his loved ones. He liked becoming more powerful, and he disliked being told what to do. His fatal flaw of arrogance led him to believe that as the chosen one, he was better equipped to achieve his goals than those who wanted the same things. This resulted in his goal and desire to eliminate those he saw as failing the galaxy, and this in turn resulted in his succumbing to the power of the dark side and serving the Emperor in oppressing the galaxy to ensure his idea of what order should be. The next thing that major villains need to have is key lieutenants. These are the minor villains that will serve as bosses to key adventures and campaign arcs. Because you see, a major villain is likely to be encountered after a series of adventures, or perhaps even at the end of your campaign. But each adventure should have its own mini-boss who is a lieutenant or an underling villain of the main villain. Now, key lieutenants should probably be fleshed out in the same way as the major villains are, but they don't need as much detail in all areas. Remember that lieutenants should make sense for the villain, and if it doesn't make sense on the surface why a certain lieutenant is working for the main villain, then their motivation should explain why they're working for the main villain. For example, it makes sense for a drow assassin to be working for a drow matron mother in the Underdark. However, it may seem odd for a surface elf to be working for the same drow matron mother. But if that elf wants revenge on their own queen, and the matron has promised it to her, then things start to come into focus. And this leads us to another point about lieutenants. They almost always see the major villain as a means to their own ends. And if that situation changes, well, that lieutenant may very well change their allegiance. So understand why the lieutenants work for the main villain, and ask yourself, Is there a way the player characters might exploit that motivation? Finally, major villains need minor minions. These minions serve the major villain, but they also serve the lieutenants. And when we think of minions, we're talking about the run-of-the-mill frontliners that the players are going to encounter throughout the different adventures they go on. These are the orcs, the orc shamans. These are the mooks that fill out the ranks. Now, minions should make sense just like the lieutenants, or at least should have a reason to be working for the main villain and their lieutenants. And remember too that since the adventures in your campaign are likely spanning a variety of levels, the minions should likewise span a variety of challenge ratings or levels themselves. Never forget that using the same minions over and over again for an entire campaign could very well cause that campaign to become extremely stagnant and downright boring. Like, not just for the players, think about yourself as the game master. Wouldn't you be bored out of your mind if you're running the exact same monsters the entire campaign? Creating allies. Okay, now let's move on to creating allies or friendly NPCs. These are the NPCs that are unlikely to oppose the characters and might even help them on their adventures or in other ways. The first thing you want to know about an ally NPC is their interests. What do they really care about? What do they want? What are they afraid of? These are in many ways some of the same questions we ask when we're answering questions about their alignment. Now, this is similar to motives that we would create for a villain, only that for a friendly NPC, the motivations are not pursued in a villainous way. An ally could want power, but they want it for a benevolent reason, and they're working to gain it through a legal means that doesn't hurt other people. Finally, ask yourself, what does the NPC do for a living? How do they make money to pay the bills and put food on the table? This should, if at all possible, tie into that NPC's interests and motivations. Finally, ask yourself, how does their occupation potentially benefit the player characters? Because when your players run into that NPC, that might become very relevant. Now remember, if you'd like to get the templates that I use when creating my games and we use in our publications, you can pick up The Secret Art of Game Mastery over on the DM Lair store. The main book contains over 100 years of compiled GM experience from my team and me. And the companion book, The Secret Art of Preparation, is designed to be written in as you prep your games and contains templates for your campaign, NPCs, major villains, locations, major towns, points of interest, and adventures. And then the third book, The Secret Art of Note-Taking, is designed to serve as a game master journal that you can write in after every game session to keep track of important events and future plot hooks. Anyway, let me know if there was anything I forgot to mention about creating NPCs, and if you'd like to hear about some of the worst monsters ever and how to actually create good monsters for your games, watch this video right here. And until next time, happy game mastering.